Batman might not have any powers of his own, but that doesn't mean he nor his rogues gallery is lacking in any way.
In fact, Batman to this day likely has one of the most diverse, iconic, and powerful roster of villains out there, despite just being a very capable and wealthy man in a batsuit. That's the dream.
Welcome back, Nerd Squad. I'm your host, Amanda McKnight.
And I'm Connor Monroe. Today we'll be taking a closer look at some of Batman's most capable villains, or perhaps too capable, as we count down the top 10 Batman villains too powerful for the DCEU.
Let's get into it. Number 10, Blockbuster. Blockbuster might not be an A-list Bat villain, but I don't think I've ever mentioned him on this channel before, and I thought it was about time that we gave him a little shout out. We see you, Blockbuster, we see you. While not one of the most popular Bat villains, Blockbuster still packs a mighty punch. The current incarnation of the villain is Roland Desmond, who has reappeared in the Prime Earth continuity throughout the current Nightwing series. In fact, even though he started out in Detective Comics, he's now actually thought of more as a Nightwing villain. Even more recently resurfacing in Nightwing in issue 83. Blockbuster has also had many incarnations throughout the years since the character's first appearance as Mark Desmond back in 1965 in Detective Comics issue 345. Some versions have been tougher and more powerful than others, but all of them have possessed some level of super strength, durability, and stamina, usually granted to them by the Blockbuster serum, and often at the cost of some intelligence. However, the current Blockbuster does not suffer the same weakness, instead simply suffering physical pain if remaining in his transformed super buff state for too long.
And at 9, Condiment King. Okay, before you yell at me, hear me out a little bit, okay? Condiment King may just seem like a random dude who uses ketchup and mustard as a weapon, but you have to admit that would not fit in the DCEU. The DCEU has a much darker tone than the Batman animated series Condiment King was created for, and if he was in the DCEU, they would have to make him incredibly deadly for it to work properly. This guy would basically just use allergies as a weapon, and I don't mean like the "oh, you got the sniffles and your eyes are kind of itching" kind of allergies. I mean like throat closes up and eyes pop out of your head kind of allergies. They would have to turn Condiment King into such a horrific killer that he would actually end up being overpowered and probably cause a lot of controversy. Even if it was just like condiments combined with acid instead of normal condiments, that would be absolutely nuts. You thought that they handled Doomsday bad? Wait until you see people's faces melting because they got hit with Dijon honey mustard and freaking acid.
Number 8, Mr. Freeze. Mr. Freeze is Victor Freeze, a vastly underrated Batman villain in my opinion, but admittedly a hard villain to bring to the big screen, though maybe not as hard to bring to the big screen as Condiment King. And that's not just because of his overall look and character design, but because of how capable he can be and how powerful he is. Mr. Freeze is one of the few Batman villains who actually possesses powers and isn't just a deranged criminal. Of course, he is still a deranged criminal. Mr. Freeze in current continuity is also a deranged scientist, who from an early age seemed to have a fixation with the cold and cryogenics. This fixation likely existed because of key tragic moments that had happened when he was younger, also taking place in and around the cold, such as his father abandoning him and his mother's fatal injury and later death at his own hands. Freeze would become so obsessed he would convince himself that he was married to the subject of the first case of cryogenic stasis, despite the fact that she was technically like a lot older than him, Nora Fields. But a change to the timeline would make it so that this was actually true and that he and Nora had in fact been together before she was frozen, so she became his real wife, meaning their relationship was no longer considered one of Victor's delusions in main continuity. Mr. Freeze is not only powerful with his ice gun and unique physiology, which allows him to freeze anything he touches and create ice structures, but he is complex and unique in appearance, meaning we likely won't see him in the DCEU anytime soon. Not that I'm saying the villains aren't complex. That wasn't like a sick burn to the DCEU or anything, just to be clear.
And at 7, Scarecrow. The Scarecrow has made an appearance in the Dark Knight movies, however those aren't in the DCEU, at least yet. Until this point, the closest we've gotten is the Fear Gas from the Arrowverse crossover event of Elseworlds. However, that gas made some insane hallucinations that ended up with the Flash, who at the time was Oliver Queen's, speed to be useless, which would be incredibly overpowered when it comes to the rest of the DCEU. When Oliver and Barry were fighting, Barry was landing hits on Oliver despite not having his super speed, and Oliver wasn't knocking Barry away with super speed punches. This This being used on a greater scale, like we would see Scarecrow do in an actual movie, would absolutely destroy the world, especially with heroes like Superman and Martian Manhunter. And we know that this is how the Scarecrow's gas would operate in the DCEU, because thanks to the Crisis on Infinite Earths crossover, we got confirmation that Ezra Miller's Flash and Grant Gustin's Flash exist in the same multiverse. Or perhaps the cinematic universe exists within the antimatter universe. It would explain the darker themes. Either way, we know that's how the gas would work, and that would be a little too much to handle in one movie.
Number 6. Bane. Bane is known for being one of Batman's all-around strongest villains, but let's not forget that Bane also brings smarts to the table. Okay, so maybe not if we're counting the Harley Quinn animated series version of Bane, but comic book Bane at least is known for also possessing a brilliant mind. A lot of people forget that about him. He was the mastermind, in fact, behind the death of Alfred, which was also part of his scheme to break the Batman in a much more all-around way. Granted, he also took out Alfred because his demands were not being met. He'd basically ordered Batman not to make a rescue attempt, but then Damian Wayne did make a rescue attempt because he didn't listen to the warning that was given to them, and so Alfred died by Bane's hands after Damian's attempt failed. Bane, being such a massive man of muscle, also makes it hard to bring him to life. He's not only a hard villain to write, but he's also a difficult one to cast and depict as well, because he just looks like literally a brick house.
Halfway through in at number 5, Arkham Knight. Not only is this character loved by some of the people who played the Batman Arkham series of games, the Arkham Knight is a highly skilled military technician who possesses expert knowledge of Batman's tactics and fighting style, which can be attributed to the fact that he was personally trained by the Vigilante, being revealed as Jason Todd, a moment that we all remember, for better or worse. He is a master of hand-to-hand combat, martial arts, and marksmanship. The high-tech military-like battle suit that he wears further enhances his physical strength, speed, and durability. When Batman was ambushed by the Dark Knight, he was able to knock the Dark Knight off his feet with one punch. This absolute mastery of Batman's tactics would make him a hella good villain, however the amount of power he has would probably be too much for the DCEU. They already had Batman fight Superman and win, so they would have to supercharge Arkham Knight to make it an actually interesting fight, which would just ruin the character even more than some would consider him already ruined.
Number 4. Ra's al Ghul, or Ra's al Ghul, depending on what you prefer. A lot of people prefer Ra's, I prefer Ra's. We can all coexist, it's a beautiful world. Ra's is one of Batman's all-time greatest nemeses. While he might not possess direct superpowers of any kind, like most of Batman's rogues, he is one of the most skilled fighters and has one of the most brilliant minds. Like Bane. I like people with brilliant minds, apparently. Too bad Ra's usually uses his brilliant mind to concoct all sorts of schemes in order to topple governments, sow chaos, and gain power the world over. Ra's al Ghul is the head of the League of Assassins and has come close to completely defeating Batman in the past, with him even successfully using Batman's own research during the Tower of Babel JLA story to defeat all of Batman's superpowered colleagues on the team.
Getting close to the end, and at number 3, Solomon Grundy. Solomon Grundy, born on a Monday. That's what the story says. But when killed, Grundy will return and be resurrected in the swamp where he died, and then because that's his thing. This sort of resurrection and recurring antagonist thing doesn't really work in movies. In TV, sure it can work. Introduce the character, then have them come back once a season for an episode or two. However, with movies, those are more often than not one-time villains that are to be dealt with and then forgotten about, unless the movie is a two-parter or the villain ends up winning. This kind of concept has to be taken into account when thinking about who would be too overpowered in the DCEU. Solomon Grundy would be one of those villains that wouldn't realistically be a one-time villain. Even if they brought him back for another movie with a big team up of villains, it wouldn't matter, because he would die and then just come back again. The story would never be over. The threat would never actually be fully handled, and that's just the way the character was written. It's great for comics and it would work okay on TV, but in movies this guy wouldn't work in the slightest. It's unfortunate because I love Grundy as a character, but they would just ruin him like they did Arkham Knight and Doomsday. May I go on?
Number 2. Poison Ivy. Poison Ivy is one of my favorite characters in the Batman universe, period. And also coincidentally one of the most powerful villains I think that currently exists in Batman's wheelhouse. She is brewing up something huge lately in the Batman comics and has threatened basically the entire world on multiple occasions, but also has sought in the past to remind people of why she strikes out as an eco-terrorist, at times working with international science communities and political meets to fight against global warming and work towards preserving important parts of our ecosystem. However, while Poison Ivy will be coming to the Arrowverse on CW, we still have yet to have a casting for her in the DCEU, and this could be because Pamela Isley is just too crazy complicated and OP to show up there. After all, she is proven before how hard she is to take on in the comics. When she took over the world, it seemed almost nothing initially, not even Batman, would be able to stop her.
Finally, in at number 1, The Batman Who Laughs. Being first introduced in Dark Days, the casting number 1 in 2017, the Batman Who Laughs was Bruce Wayne from Earth 22 of the Dark Multiverse. He was a lieutenant of Barbados, and the leader of the Dark Knights during the first Dark Multiverse invasion, and later the infected heroes of the Secret Six. He convinced Perpetua, the original creator of the multiverse, to choose him as her lieutenant over Lex Luthor, as his vision was limited by his ego. Then the Batman Who Laughs continued on with his own plans, eventually acquiring cosmic power and becoming a bigger threat than Perpetua herself. Yeah, that's right, this guy ends up gaining cosmic power. He ends up implanting his brain into the corpse of a version of Bruce Wayne who had Dr. Manhattan's abilities, giving the Batman Who Laughs near omnipotence. Yeah, this guy is the definition of overpowered. And not only that, but he's an absolute psychopath. He will gut you like a fish while your family watches and then make them play double dutch with your intestines and think that that was a boring weekend. This guy is absolutely insane. I know I said that the DCEU is dark, but this is even darker than they would go. There, in my opinion, is no way that they could introduce the Batman Who Laughs properly without making the movie rated R or literally just being unable to publish it. It's absolutely insane. So yeah, I don't think we'll be seeing him anytime soon. There we have it, friends, the top 10 Batman villains too powerful for the DCEU.
Who would you like to see in the DCEU, and who do you think is too overpowered? Let us know in the comments below.
Thank you all so much for watching. I have been and shall remain Condiment Monroe.
And I'm your host, Amanda McKnight, reminding you, as always, to stay nerdy, YouTube.